The great hound stood in the middle of the marble hall at Ravenswood Court, and the whole of the county drew back from it as one body. He was enormous, grey as slate, taller at the shoulder than a seated child, and he had planted himself square across the path between the door and the fire, so that no one might pass without being weighed. Lady Marchcroft in her diamonds made the mistake of extending a gloved hand toward his head, and the sound that came out of him was low and terrible, a sound from somewhere under the floor of the world. She snatched her hand back. The footman went stiff along the walls, and at the head of the room, master of it all, the Earl of Ravenswood watched without moving, his face giving nothing, a man who had learned long ago that stillness frightened people more than temper. They had come to see whether the rumors were true. They had come, in truth, to see him. For 3 years the Earl had shut himself inside these walls, and let the season pass him by. And now that he had opened his doors again, every family with a marriageable daughter had put on its best and climbed the long drive to test the ground. What they found was a house that had forgotten how to be warm, and a dog that seemed to guard the coldness of it like treasure. You have perhaps met a house like this, a place where grief has been folded up and put away in every drawer, so that even the silver seems to be holding its breath. If a story of a hard house made soft again is one you would care to stay for, then stay. And keep your eye on the dog. Grace Aldua stood 2 floors below all of this, in the kitchen, and knew none of it. Yet. She had her sleeves pushed to the elbow, and her hands deep in a bowl of pastry, and the heat of the great range had put a shine on her face that no lady upstairs would have permitted on her own. She was 26, tall for a woman, with brown hair pinned back plain and a way of moving that wasted nothing. She had come to Ravenswood 8 months before as undercook, and had risen to cook when the old woman above her left for her sister's in Bath, and she had never once been up the back stairs past the green baize door that divided her world from theirs. She did not expect to. A cook was a pair of hands and an appetite for early mornings. The county did not know her name, and she had made a kind of peace with not being known. The kitchen was her country, and she governed it well. It ran the length of the house below the ground, low-ceilinged and warm, the great range breathing its red breath at one end, and the cold larder at the other, and between them, the long scrubbed deal table where every meal of that vast house began its life. She knew the temper of the range, the way a sailor knows his sea, where the heat pooled and where it thinned, which corner would scorch a tart, and which would leave a joint pink at the bone. She kept a scullery maid named Nan and a boy called Tom who turned the spit and fetched the coal, and she was kind to them in the plain, unfussy way of a woman who has herself been young and hungry and low in a great house, and who has not forgotten it. She woke before the birds. She was the last light out at night. And in 8 months not one dish had gone up her stairs that she had not touched with her own hands. She had not always meant to be a cook. Her father had held a tenant farm 3 counties east, 40 acres, and a good name, and she had grown up expecting to keep a house of her own one day, a small one, with a garden and hens, and a husband who came in, muddy at dusk. Then the wet years came, and the rent, and the fever that took her mother, and at the last the failure that took the farm and her father together within a single hard winter. She had been 23 when she found herself with nothing and no one, an educated girl who could read and cipher and run a dairy, and no place in the world that wanted any of it. Service had been the door that opened. She had gone through it without weeping, because weeping cooked no dinners, and she had made herself so good at the work that need had turned, over the years, into something almost like pride. She did not tell this to anyone at Ravenswood. A cook was a pair of hands. The hands did not require a history. What the county did know, what it said behind fans and over card tables, was that the Earl of Ravenswood was a cold man, and likely a cruel one. The dog was proof enough. A gentleman who kept such an animal, who let it snarl at duchesses, who did not smile and did not dance and did not so much as pretend to enjoy the company of his own guests, was a man with something wrong at the center of him. Lady Marchcroft said as much, in the drawing-room that very night, her voice pitched to Carrie. "One pities the girl who ends up mistress of that," she said. "Whatever she brings him, she will freeze in a 12-month. The other ladies made the small sounds women make when they wish to agree without seeming unkind. The Earl heard none of it, or seemed to hear none of it. His name was Julian, though almost no one used it any longer, and he had reasons for the cold that not one of his guests would have guessed. Reasons this telling is not yet ready to open. What may be said now is only what the hall could see. A tall man of 34, dark-haired, with a scar that ran pale through his left eyebrow, and a mouth that had forgotten its own softness, standing beside a dog no one could touch. When the last carriage had rolled away into the dark, he put his hand once on the animal's great head, and the animal leaned into him, and for a moment the hardness went out of the man's face like a tide going out. Then a servant came near, and it returned. The dog was called Bran. He had been a gift, though the Earl never said from whom, and he had not lain down easily for any living soul in 3 years. The grooms fed him at arm's length, sliding the bowl toward him with the toe of a boot. The housekeeper crossed herself when he passed. Twice he had put a groom against a wall, not biting, only pinning, holding the man there with the whole grey weight of himself and that low subterranean sound, until someone thought to fetch the Earl. And the Earl had only to say the animal's name once quietly from a doorway, and Bran would let the man go and cross the yard to stand at his master's knee. It was understood throughout the house that Bran belonged to the Earl and to grief and to no one else, and that the wisest course was to keep well out of his way. Grace understood this too. She had seen him only twice, both times from a distance, a grey shape at the edge of the lawn, and she had thought him beautiful the way a storm is beautiful, from indoors through glass. She had noticed, the way she noticed everything about the house that reached her below stairs, that the food which went up for the animal came back untouched, as often as not, and that no one thought this strange, because a grieving dog was only the visible shape of a grieving house, and everyone at Ravenswood had long since stopped remarking on either. She had thought, more than once, standing at her range, that it was a hard thing to let a creature go hungry because you had not the patience to learn its sorrow. She had not known she was about to be given the chance to learn it herself. The house itself she had come to know in its bones, in the way that servants know a house better than its owners ever do. She knew which chimneys drew and which smoked, which stairs betrayed a footstep, and which kept it secret, which of the 30 rooms above were kept shrouded in holland covers and had not been opened in years. She knew there was one room, in the east wing, that Mrs. Denby dusted the door of but never entered, and locked again each time, and that the key to it hung on the housekeeper's own ring and on no other. She did not ask about it. A cook learned early which doors were hers to open, and this one plainly belonged to a grief she had no part in. It happened in the small hours of a Tuesday in late October, 3 weeks into the reopened house. Grace had come down before 4 to set the bread, as she always did, moving through the dark kitchen by the red glow of the banked range, and she had opened the yard door to bring in the morning's milk. And there in the freezing dark of the flagged passage lay Bran. He had got out somehow, or been let out, and he was shivering, and there was blood-dried black on the pad of one great forepaw where he had torn it on something in the night. He lifted his head when the door opened. He looked at her, and Grace, who did not know she ought to be afraid, who knew only that a creature was cold and heard in her passage, said, "Well, and who has let you out into this?" She did not reach for him. She had grown up on a tenant farm with dogs that would take a finger off. A stranger, and she knew better than to put her hand toward a hurt animal in the dark. She looked at him instead, and let him look at her, and read what she could in the set of him. He was not snarling now. He was too cold and too tired to snarl. He was trembling all along his great frame, in a way that had as much of exhaustion in it as of chill, and his amber eyes in the low red light held that particular flat wariness of a creature that has been alone, with its pain a long time, and expects nothing of any one. She knew that. Look, she had worn it herself. Once in the winter the farm went. So she went back into the warm kitchen, unhurried, keeping her movements slow and plain so he could watch everyone. and she poured milk into a shallow dish and set it in the doorway where the heat of the range could reach it, and she took a heel of yesterday's mutton from the larder, and set that beside it. And then she sat herself down on the cold stone with her back against the door frame, and her hands quiet in her lap. And she waited. She did not look at him too long, or too hard. She talked to him low, while she waited, nonsense mostly. The weather and the bread and the price of coal. The way she might talk to steady a nervous horse, letting the sound of her voice do the work her hands were not permitted to do. The dark outside was iron cold, and the flags struck up through her skirts. And she did not move. It was near an hour before he came. He did it in stages, dragging himself a foot and stopping, watching her, dragging another foot, the torn pad leaving a small dark print each time on the stone. She kept her eyes on the middle distance, and her breathing even. When at last he reached the dish, he ate as though he had forgotten food could be given rather than taken, quickly, then more slowly, and once he lifted his head mid-mouthful to check that she had not moved. And she had not. And something in him settled a degree. When the milk was gone and the mutton after it, he did not turn and go back out into the dark. He stood a moment, swaying a little on the sore foot, considering her. Then he lowered his great gray body down onto the warm flags beside her, close enough that she could feel the furnace heat of him along her arm, and he put his torn paw across her knee as if he had decided something that could not now be undone, and he slept. She sat very still and let him. Her legs went numb beneath his weight, and she did not shift them. There are trusts a person does not disturb once they are given. And she had been given one, and she meant to keep it whole until morning. If morning was what it took, that was how the Earl found them, a little after 5. He had woken to an empty hearthrug where the dog should have been, and had gone through the sleeping house in his shirt-sleeves with a candle, opening doors, until he came down the last stair into the kitchen passage and stopped as though he had walked into a wall. There was his hound, the animal that had not lain willingly at his own feet in 3 years asleep, with his ruined paw across the knee of a servant girl he had never seen. And the girl looked up at him without rising, because she had a sleeping dog on her lap and could not, and she said quite simply, "He has cut his foot, my lord. I did not like to bind it while he slept, though it should be seen to." He did not answer at once. He was looking at the dog. His candle shook, very slightly, and the small flame threw a wavering light up the passage and across the sleeping gray shape and the girl beneath it, and for a moment the master of Ravenswood Court simply stood at the foot of his own back stair and could not speak. Then he was looking at her, at the plain brown hair coming loose from its pins, and the flower still ghosting one forearm, and the perfect stillness of her, and something moved behind his face that she could not read, and that frightened her more than the snarling had frightened Lady Marchcroft, because it was so entirely unguarded. So plainly the face of a man who had forgotten he was being watched. "Do not wake him," the Earl said at last. His voice was low and level, and it came out rougher than he had meant it to. "Stay as you are." Then he set the candle down on the flagstone, and he crouched. This proud, cold man in his shirt-sleeves on his own kitchen floor, and he took the torn paw gently into his 2 hands to look at it. He handled the great foot with a care that did not match anything the county said of him, turning it to the candlelight, parting the coarse gray hair to find the cut, and the dog stirred and sighed and did not wake, and let itself be handled by both of them as it had let itself be handled by no one, in 3 years. The Earl's shoulder was a hand's breadth from Grace's own. She could feel the cold that still clung to his linen, and beneath it the warmth of the man. And she could see, this near, that his eyes were not black as she had thought from a distance, but a very dark gray, and rimmed just now with the red of a man who had not slept. And she looked at the paw, and not at him, because looking at him seemed suddenly a thing she had no permission for. Neither of them moved for a long while. The range ticked. Somewhere above them, the great cold house slept on, and did not know that something in it had just, very quietly, begun to thaw. "It wants cleaning and binding," she said at last, because the silence had gone on past what she could hold. "I have clean linen, and I have honey, which my mother swore by for a wound that must not fester. If you will hold his head, my lord, and speak to him, I will do it now while he is easy. And he need never wake to the sting of it." The Earl looked at her a moment longer. No. Then he moved, without a word, to sit on the cold floor at the dog's head and take the great skull into his lap. And he bent close and murmured to the animal in a voice too low for Grace to catch the words of, and Bran's tail moved once against the stone, and Grace cleaned and bound the torn foot with hands that did not shake, though her heart was going hard. And it was done before the dog had properly stirred. When she looked up, the Earl was watching her hands. "Where did you learn that?" he said. "On a farm, my lord," she said. "Everything I know I learned somewhere. It was needed." He said nothing to that, but he did not look away for a moment, and she had the sense of having been seen plainly and entirely for the first time in years, and did not know what to do with it. And so she reached for the honey pot and stoppered it. And the ordinary small act let them both breathe again. Bran mended. The cut was clean, and Grace kept it so, and within the week the great hound had made the kitchen passage his own, arriving each morning before 4, as though he too had bread to set, lying against the warm brick while she worked. The house did not know what to make of it. The grooms came to the green baize door to peer. The housekeeper, Mrs. Denby, a woman with 40 years of the family behind her, watched Grace over the accounts with a new and careful attention. "You want to mind yourself," she said once, not unkindly. "That dog is his lordship's heart. What's left of it? A girl who touches the heart of a man like that had best know what she is about." Grace said she was about nothing at all, that she had only fed a hungry animal. And Mrs. Denby said, "Aye, and the tide has only wet your shoe," and would say no more. The Earl began, though, to come down. It was the dog he came for, of course. Anyone might have said so. And he said so himself. On the third morning, standing awkwardly in the doorway of a room no Earl had entered in living memory, "I came to see the paw," he said. Grace showed him the paw. He stayed the better part of an hour. He came the next morning, too, and the one after, and he stopped pretending after the first week that it was the paw. He would sit on the settle by the range while she worked, saying little, watching the bread come out, and the coppers scoured, and the great grey dog lay content at her feet, and something in the set of his shoulders would ease that eased nowhere else in his life. He asked her once why she talked to the dog. She said a creature that had gone unspoken to for a long time forgot it had ever been worth speaking to, and that it was cheaply mended by a little conversation. He was quiet a while after that, and she understood, too late, that she might not have been speaking only of the dog, and that he might not have taken it only that way, and she busied her hands with the dough and did not look up. Grace, for her part, learned to feel exactly where he was in a room without looking. When he came down the stair, the skin along her arms knew it before her ears did. She learned the sound of his particular step, unhurried and even, and the way the dog's tail would begin to move against the flags a moment before the latch lifted, so that Bran was her warning and her weathercock both. She told herself this was nothing. She told herself a great many things that autumn, and her body believed none of them, and continued to warm at his nearness, like dough near a fire, and to cool when he left. There came a morning, deep in November, when she reached for the heavy iron kettle at the same moment. He rose to lift it for her, some old courtesy surfacing in him unbidden, and their hands met on the cold handle in the dark before the range was properly lit. Neither drew back at once. His hand was over hers, and hers beneath his, and the kettle hung forgotten between them, and Grace found she could not breathe in the ordinary way. She looked up. He was very close. Closer than the length of a kitchen ought ever to have brought them, and the guarded thing had gone out of his face again, and for a moment his gaze moved over her mouth, her eyes, and she saw in it, plain as print, a thing she had told herself for weeks she was imagining. His thumb moved, once against the back of her hand, the smallest possible motion, a question, with no words to it. Then a coal settled in the grate with a soft crash, and he stepped back and lifted the kettle, and set it on the hook and said, in a voice not quite level, "You should not carry this, it is too heavy by half." And she said the county did not employ a cook to be spared the kettles, and he almost smiled, the corner of his mouth moving, and did not, and the moment closed over like water. Still she carried the memory of his thumb against her hand, up to her narrow bed that night, and lay a long time awake with it, and knew, whatever came, that she had not invented him. He was not an easy man to know. He gave nothing away in words. She learned him instead the way she learned a temperamental oven, by watching what he did rather than what he said. She learned that he ate almost nothing, and that when she began without a word to send up small particular dishes, a coddled egg bowl of good broth, the plates came down empty. She learned that he did not sleep, that the candle in the far window burned till 3 most nights. She learned that there was a room in the east wing that was always locked, and that Mrs. Denby went pale when it was mentioned. And she learned one gray afternoon when he had lingered past all reason, that his coldness was not the absence of feeling, but a wall built around too much of it, because when a delivery cart backfired in the yard and a child of the scullery cried out, the Earl was across the kitchen, and between the boy and the door before Grace had drawn breath, his hand hard on the child's shoulder, his face white. "Are you hurt?" he said to the boy, and it was not a question so much as a command that the answer be no. The boy was not hurt. The Earl straightened and saw them all staring, and left without a word. Grace had seen, though. Whatever had frozen this man, it had to do with a child, and with being too far away, and with a sound like a shot. You will have guessed already that this could not stay a quiet thing between a kitchen and a dog. Houses talk. Before long, someone above stairs had noticed how often his lordship was not to be found, and had followed the sound of him down through the green baize door, and had seen a reckoning was coming. And if the woman who set out milk for a hurt animal in the dark has earned your care by now, stay close to her through it, for she is going to need every friend she can find. The one who saw was Lady Marchcroft's daughter, Cassandra, who had been brought back to Ravenswood a second time in her mother's determined campaign, and who came upon the Earl in the kitchen passage on a morning she had risen early, to walk the grounds and improve her complexion. She said nothing. Then she went back up the stairs very quietly. Her face, though, when Grace glanced up and caught it in the doorway, had gone the particular still white of a woman who has just decided something. The house grew colder toward Grace in the days that followed, in the small ways a great house has of turning. A footman who had been civil now looked through her. Word had come down, plainly from above the baize door, and the word was not kind. Mrs. Denby heard it and reported it to Grace at the accounts one evening, gently, so that she should not be ambushed by it. "They are saying you are a schemer," the housekeeper said, not meeting her eye. A kitchen girl who set her cap at a broken man through his dog. "I do not believe it. I have watched you 8 months. Yet you had best know what is being said of you, for they mean to use it." Grace heard the label land and felt the old cold settle in her chest, the certainty that the world had once again decided what she was, without troubling to ask her. She might have gone on bearing it in silence, as she had borne worse. What she had not counted on was that the Earl himself would come down that same night, late, after the house had gone quiet, and find her alone at the dying range with the dog at her feet, and stand a moment in the doorway with his hands at his sides, like a man who has walked a long way to say a thing and is not sure of the words. "I have heard what they are calling you," he said. "I would have you know that I do not care, in the smallest degree, what any of them think of me. Yet I find I cannot bear that they should think it of you, and I have been trying these 3 days to understand why a thing that has never touched me should suddenly be unbearable." He stopped. The firelight moved on his hard, tired face. "It is because I want you," he said low, as though the words cost him something to set down. "Not your cooking nor your kindness to the dog, though God knows those undid me. First you. I have wanted you since the morning I came down that stair and found the one warm thing left in this house asleep on a stone floor. I did not mean to say it in a kitchen. I do not seem able to say it anywhere else." Grace stood with her heart going and her hands white-knuckled on the edge of the table, and could not for a moment answer, and the wanting in his voice was so plain and so undefended that it frightened her more than any coldness could have. She said only when she could speak that he ought not to say such things to a servant, that it was not safe for either of them. And he said he was aware, and that he had never in his life been less able to be sensible. And then he wished her good night, in a voice gone rough, and went, and left her trembling by the fire with the whole of her careful peace in ruins around her. What Cassandra had decided became clear at dinner a fortnight later. The Earl, pressed past all his defenses by the obligations of a reopened house, had at last consented to give a proper dinner. 30 at the long table, the county's best, the candles lit the whole length of the gallery, and the plate brought out that had not seen air in 3 years. Grace and her kitchen worked from before dawn. She would never see the table. That was not her place. Her triumphs went up the stairs on silver and came back as bones. Then, midway through the second course, a footman came down, white-faced, to say that his lordship required her in the dining room now. Grace went up the back stairs for the first time in 8 months, with her heart going like a hammer, and flour still on her apron, because there had been no time to change, and the summons had been now. She came through the door into a blaze of candlelight, and 30 turned faces and the long gleam of the table, and she did not understand at first why she had been called. Then Lady Marchcroft spoke, in that carrying voice, into a silence she had clearly arranged. "There she is," she said, pleasant as poison, "the kitchen girl. Do come in. My daughter tells the most curious tale, and we thought it only fair you should have the chance to deny it. Cassandra, dear, tell his lordship's cook what you saw." And Cassandra, prettily, cruelly, told the table how she had come upon the Earl of Ravenswood sitting on a settle, in his own kitchen at dawn, watching a servant, like a moonstruck boy, and how the whole house said the cook had bewitched him, and how a man in his position could not be too careful of the sort of woman who wormed her way toward a title through the back stairs, and a dog. The silence after was the worst thing Grace had ever stood inside. She was aware of the flour on her hands. She was aware of every diamond in the room, and of her own worn shoes, and of the 30 faces deciding, all at once, exactly what she was. She looked for the Earl and could not find his eyes. He was staring at the table, his jaw like carved stone, his hands very still on either side of his plate, and she thought, with a plunging certainty, that he would let it happen, that he would let them make her a scheming servant to save his own name, and that she would be gone from Ravenswood by morning, and that the warmth of these weeks had been a thing she had invented alone. Bran, who had followed her up the forbidden stairs and stood, now pressed against her leg, growled low at the whole bright room. And Lady Marchcroft smiled, and said the thing that was meant to end it. "Send her back down, Ravenswood, and let us forget the vulgar little business ever occurred." For a long moment the Earl did not move at all. Then he rose. He rose slowly, to his full height, and the room quieted the way a field quiets before weather, and he came down the length of that long table past all of them, past the diamonds and the candles and his own displayed and gleaming plate, and he stopped in front of Grace, where she stood in her flour and her worn shoes, and he did the thing no one in that room could have accounted for. He took her hand, her flour-dusted, work-reddened hand, in front of the whole county, and he held it, and he turned to face them all with her hand in his. "This is the woman I mean to marry," he said. 9 words, level and quiet, in the very room the county had chosen for her ruin. The gallery came apart in a single held breath. Lady Marchcroft's fan stopped halfway to her face. Cassandra's mouth opened on nothing, and Grace stood with her hand in the hand of the Earl of Ravenswood, and felt the whole architecture of her life shift under her like ice, going out on a river, and could not speak and did not need to, because he had done all the speaking that was required and would do a little more. He looked down at her, and the coldness was entirely gone from his face now, gone as though it had never been, and he said low, only for her, "You will forgive that I asked you in company. I have found I am a coward, in private, and only brave with an audience." And then, because 30 people were still staring, and something more was owed them, he lifted his head and said the rest. He told them, in that same level voice, what none of them had known. That 3 years before he had lost his wife and his infant son in 1 week of a fever that took half the village, and that he had been in London on business he thought urgent when the word came, and had ridden home too late by a single day, and had never forgiven himself the distance or the day that he had shut the house, because he could not bear a room his son would never grow into. That the dog had been the boy's. A pup got the summer before, and had grieved as thoroughly as any of them, and let no one near since. That animal, said the Earl, has not laid his head willingly on a living soul in 3 years. Until 3 weeks ago, when he chose the one person in this house who saw a cold and hurting creature and offered it warmth without wanting anything back. I have watched her do the same for me. I will not send her down. I will not let you name her a schemer when she is the only honest thing that has entered this house. Since the day I closed it, he turned back to Grace. If she will have a house so long unheated, and the fool who let it go cold, it was Mrs. Burr. Denby, of all people, standing in the servants' doorway with the pudding gone forgotten in her hands, who began to weep, and who said, into the ringing quiet, "She will, my lord. Any woman with sense would, and she has more than most." A small laugh went round the table, uncertain, then warmer. The county recalibrating itself as counties do, deciding, now that its highest member had decided that, of course, they had always seen something fine in the girl. Lady Marchcroft did not laugh. She had gone very still, the calculation running visibly behind her eyes, and what she saw there was that she had wagered her daughter's prospects on a cruelty and lost, and that the whole county had watched her lose. She rose with what dignity remained to her, and said the dinner had been charming and the hour was late, and she gathered Cassandra, and she went. She was not destroyed. She was only at last, and in front of everyone, wrong. Grace found her voice on the stairs afterward, when the guests had gone, and the candles were being pinched out, and the Earl had walked her down toward her own world, through the green baize door, with the dog padding behind. "You might have told me first," she said, "in the passage, any morning this fortnight." And he said, "I know, I told you. I am a coward in the small rooms." And she laughed, the first laugh either of them had managed in that house, in longer than they could say, and the sound of it in the cold passage was the sound of the tide, finally, fully coming back in. They were married in the village church in the first week of December, quietly, with no county at all, only the household and the vicar and the great grey dog lying across the chancel step where he had refused to be moved. Grace wore a gown of soft green that Mrs. Denby had somehow conjured in a fortnight, and she went up the aisle without a soul on her arm, because she had no father living to give her, and the Earl came down to meet her halfway, rather than wait at the rail, which the vicar had never seen done and never forgot. She did not bring him fortune. She did not bring him rank. She brought him a house that learned again how to smell of bread before dawn, and a dog that slept now between two people, instead of guarding the absence of one, and the particular warmth of a woman who had spent her life feeding others, and was, for the first time, being fed. The east wing was opened that spring. He did it himself, one bright morning, with Grace beside him, and the key that Mrs. Mendes, and the key that Mrs. Hapray, Denby had kept and never used, and they let the light into the nursery that had been locked 3 years, and they did not speak for a while, and then Grace said only that it was a good room, and full of mourning, and that a child would sleep well in it when the time came. He put his arm around her. Below in the kitchen the range was warm, as it was always warm now, and the bread was rising, and Bran lay stretched full length across the flagstone by the door, in the exact spot where he had once dragged himself, cold and bleeding out of the dark, and had found a pair of quiet hands that wanted nothing from him but that he live. He was old for a wolfhound now, and grey to the muzzle, and he slept a great deal in the warm. Yet every morning, still before 4, when Grace came down in the dark to set the bread, he was there before her, waiting at the door, having decided long ago, and once for all, where in this wide, cold world the warmth was kept, and meaning never to be far from it again.